You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with Kimberly Fisher, Principal Second Violin of the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Hello, nice to see you today.
Thanks for coming today. I'd love to just get right into it. You started playing when you were 3?
I did, but I wasn't one of those prodigy types. I didn't get serious until with the violin until I was about 11, which in so many fields that's still early, but of course not so much for the violin. I was in the Suzuki method, which I love, and as a parent, I had my child do Suzuki, but a lot of the repertoire didn't hit me. It turns out that Baroque is not my favorite era, and the Suzuki method is heavily Baroque until you get a little later. So I was darn near quitting about age 10 or 11, and I said to my father, Dad, I think I'm going to quit. And it's notable that he was my teacher. And he was so smart. He said, don't go think about this right now, and then don't necessarily quit. He said, but you don't have to do a lot. But just know that if you quit now, you probably won't ever be able to be very good at it. So even if you think as an adult, you might want to play in an orchestra for community or a string quartet for fun, whatever, then don't quit. Just do 10 minutes a day. Well, honestly, that's about all I was doing anyways.
Right.
But I walked off and thought about it for about 10 minutes or so. And I came back and thinking that I was in charge, I said, okay, my rules, I won't quit, but I'm not going to practice very much. Thinking, and of course he was like, oh yeah, sure, now you're in charge, haha.
Yeah.
But what he did then was he gave me the Lalo Symphony Espagnole, which was too hard for me, but just turned me on the fire of this flashy music with Spanish flavor and lots of, violin tricks and stuff. So it got me going. And honestly, I didn't look back from then. Wow. So he was very wise with that.
So from Suzuki to Lalo.
Yeah, I remember I was like doing Bach double kind of badly. So it was a huge leap.
Yeah.
But, I probably would have quit if he hadn't done something like that. So I think it's important, like when we start listening to music and, so often kids are exposed to just one type of music. Maybe their parents only like, Baroque music, or they only like early classical or something.
Right.
Or maybe they only like Shostakovich, who knows? But it's important to listen to many different styles because you don't know like how many of them are going to hit you.
Right. And maybe if one's not speaking to you, it doesn't mean they're all not.
Exactly. It doesn't mean I don't like Baroque now. I love it, actually. But it took a different set of steps for me to get there.
And so at that age, did he then pass you off to a teacher through high school, or did you stay?
No, I stayed with him until I went to Curtis. And so that was a pretty big adjustment to have a different teacher suddenly. But where we lived, there weren't a lot of teachers. He was on the faculty of the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton, Canada. And he was for our money, the best teacher in the city. And that was actually unusual too, because since that was his job, he would, be at work all day teaching violin lessons. And by the time he came home, he didn't necessarily want to do another violin lesson.
Right.
So if I was practicing upstairs, and I know a lot of parents do this, but he'd holler up, do that again. It's out of tune, slow down, whatever.
Yeah.
But that turned into my violin lessons, actually. And so I became an extremely good practicer, actually, because I just couldn't get away with poor practice.
Right.
And, as a young person, I didn't really value that. But as soon as I got into the real world and I didn't have just unlimited practice time, and, I did have things I had to accomplish, then that practice technique really hits home. I'm so grateful for that background with it.
Wow. Yeah, it is incredible. And the more you can get done in the shorter amount of time, the better.
Yeah. I always tell my students, I'm here to help you practice less. And then I say, but as soon as you get good at it, I want you to practice more.
So true.
And by then, they probably want to.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think it was really cool that your dad kind of made it your thing by giving you a piece that you were interested like that. Then you create ownership. And once the person has ownership, then the passion comes.
It's very different.
Instead of forcing it down
their throat. It's very hard. I think it's hard for parents to find that and to do that. My son is now 25 years old, and like I said, I put him in Suzuki, and I had made a deal with him. He kept telling me he didn't want to do it anymore. And I said, well, you don't know enough about it now, but by the time you're good enough to play Bach double, then you can make a decision. And darn if he didn't go and learn Bach double really fast.
And he's like,
I'm done. And I couldn't break my promise to him. So even though the advice I give to all parents is to, have your kids do music or art or dance or something that's creative, And even if they don't like it, have them do a little bit of it, because I didn't like math, but there was no question I was going to do my math, right? I didn't like to, make my bed, but I had to make my bed. It's just, if you get the routine going and you establish something that is just commonplace, that you do this every day or almost every day, there's not so much arguing. It just has to be a given, just like I said, just like math homework. Or
exactly. And music has that power that once you get to a certain point, it sucks you in.
It does.
And there's no getting out of it
I
after
meet
that.
so many more people who say to me, oh, I wish my mom or my dad had, had me keep going with music. I quit and I wish they hadn't let me. I hear that way more than I hear the story of, my mom made me practice. I really don't, once in a while you can imagine that it was probably a different scenario than saying to the kid, you got to practice 15 minutes a day. That was probably a parent who was forcing to practice endlessly,
Exactly.
And another thing is too, if your kid, if you're a person who isn't necessarily jiving with your teacher, then look for a different teacher. That there are usually teachers in the city that will fit you better if it's not working, and there are very respectful ways to do that, to make that move and still stay with your current teacher. You can still stay friendly. It doesn't have to be
right. It doesn't have to be an actual
combative.
divorce.
Right,
exactly.
Yeah. But I think that if it's not working, sometimes you can look for an external help. Anyways, it still comes down to you, and it's on your shoulders. But yeah,
I would love to ask you a little bit about the camp and the music festival. So you're the music director.
Yes. So in 1997, so what's that? 23 years ago. My business partner, I founded the Philadelphia International Music Festival. So it's PIMF.org. Excuse me. It's just outside of Philadelphia in Bryn Mawr College, and it's takes place. The college is a little bit like Hogwarts. It's beautiful there, and we have been going for that many years. We started as just strings, and then we expanded to have full orchestra. 10 years ago, something like this. The faculty is almost entirely Philadelphia Orchestra members, and to be clear, it's also the members who love to teach.
Right,
It's not every person in a great orchestra is a good teacher, but in this case, we try to really stick to our best teachers and people who love to support kids. We have students from around the world. The youngest is usually about 7 or 8 years old, and the oldest is in their 30s. But obviously we have programs set for every age level. And one thing that's different as well is that it's based more on level than it is on age. So, for instance, an 8-year-old who's really stunning can wind up playing in the one of the top orchestras there that takes place because that's where this person belongs.
Right.
And then if they're under 10, they go around and do all their bigger kid activities, but then they go and do crafts,
right.
And they stay with a pod of 8-year-olds or whatever.
Right.
So that's been something that sets us apart. And I also feel that we accept every level of student. So I think that what I notice happens with that is that we have there's a much more warm and kind of embracing atmosphere at the camp. Well, it's actually also very electric. We have so much going on. Like in one week of our camp, we fit in what a lot of camps fit in 6 weeks.
Wow.
So it's incredibly active. But if you've got a kid that's like 14 and is playing, a nice 4-line song, on the violin, but is sitting next to a kid who's, 12 and is playing. Just won the concerto competition, or was a finalist in menuhin competition, because we have a lot of really top-notch kids. But it doesn't go to that highly competitive mood, like some of the camps that I went to growing up, where it's pretty brutal. So while at the same time as the kids come and they can be highly inspired by those around them because you're wanting to raise your own level to meet them, it's not the kind of the cutthroat thing is not prevalent there.
Right.
And also it's short too. We have two-week sessions. So, and people can come for 1 week of any of those. And the timing of that is the end of June, the last 2 weeks of June, and then the middle 2 weeks of July. The reason is because the Philadelphia Orchestra is in Philadelphia at that time, and we're traveling on the other weeks.
Right. And I saw a really neat quote that you were talking about kind of the importance of summer camp and how much more you can get done. And I remember that in my own experiences.
Definitely.
It was paramount to my journey.
And how about the lifelong friends you get?
Absolutely. It's so incredible. And that's really starts your network, which you don't really understand in high school what that does for you later.
That's very true.
And
very
kind
true.
of building this world network and where everybody ends up going. And
it's really true. And just learning what else is out there. I mean, I think the exposure to other other levels of kids. We have one of the problems I had to face early on, which took a lot of learning on my part, was what to do with the families where the kid in Illinois, I'm just making up whatever, who's the first chair of everything she does.
Right.
Then she gets into this setting and she's suddenly not, and trying to help the families understand what that means. And the fact that she's not first chair this time is also a good lesson. It's not that she's failed. It's not that she's doing poorly.
Yeah, it's more the world stage of look at what's possible.
Yes, and in a short dose too.
Right.
So it's not like being thrown into an 8-week thing where now you're stuck. Sort of
right,
thing,
and I didn't realize I was terrible.
Yeah. Right. And my parents are far away. But we have kids literally from all over the world. And the most surprising to me was a group of violinists from Africa. And they were from, it wasn't South Africa. It wasn't like sort of gentrified areas or whatever where the classical music is a strong element. So that was very fun to meet them and to get to know how they're learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so incredible when you have started something and then you see that it's spread and that you're getting students from all over.
It's great.
How do you... I guess now, how are you kind of reaching out to those other nations? Is it because the teachers are so well known?
Well, the Philadelphia Orchestra, of course, is really well known and has such a strong history. And then the individual teachers themselves are well known. For instance, clarinet with Ricardo Morales, like our clarinet program sells out like overnight.
I'm sure.
And he's very generous with his time and makes a point of getting to those kids a lot. I say kids, like I said, a lot of for him, most of them are college students, But yeah, my business partner, Sandy Marcucci, and she's the president of the organization, and she's just a force of nature. She's so high energy, and one of her passions is intercultural relations and so on. So that's been a real thing for her to want to include the international aspect of it. And it's worked.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's just so great. It's great for Philadelphia. It's great for the members of the orchestra and, of course, for the kids to have that opportunity and then to go out.
It proved that there was a need for such. Because when we started, it's been very, very hard work, very challenging. There are times when I think, I remember one year I was saying, Sandy, I'm never doing this again. And then the next year she said, Kim, I'm never doing this again. But I was like, okay, but I want to keep doing it. So you have to, we've definitely had that. But now that we're, it takes a long time to get those things sorted out and
get the foundation built.
Exactly. But it flies really, really well now.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so for you doing summer festivals, did you do them in high school before you got to Curtis, or was Curtis a pretty big shock?
Curtis was a huge shock, but not because of the camp situation. So actually my parents taught at a camp in Colorado called Rocky Ridge, which I loved, and I would go with them there. Had my first boyfriend there, all those memories. I played with an orchestra for the first time as a soloist, things like that.
Yeah.
So that was great, but I wouldn't say that prepared me for Curtis, but it prepared me for a lot of other things. And a lot of times our kids are in their schools and maybe don't have the support group around them of other kids who get it.
Right.
You might have a band or orchestra program or choir or something, but we're talking about going there and committing your whole summer to something, and you're with only kids that are on that same, or at least a similar path.
Yes.
And it's very powerful.
Yes. And starting to realize that that's their life calling.
Yes.
And that they're going to be doing that forever.
Yeah. And that it's hard and that it takes work. And, I used to sometimes would travel for my son, who was a tennis player as a young person. And I would, in order to be able to make it work financially, I would take some students with me to wherever it was going.
Good idea.
And one of the things I used that for was going like down to Florida because he had tournaments or something, and I'd bring kids who weren't sure if they wanted to become musicians or not. They thought that they liked it a lot and so on. And I would bring them and I'd make them practice 7 hours a day. And I remember one kid in particular who was like, oh, thank goodness I did that because I don't want to do the practice. I was like, okay, I'm glad you figured that out now rather than after you have you're in college. And
and going,
or trying
to, this is a lot.
Yeah, practice to win an audition of some sort, whatever. Yeah.
What was your time at Curtis like? Was it just kind of all-encompassing? Did you relish all of that intensity?
I wish I could say that. It was actually a really bumpy ride for me.
Was it?
And so part of it was, the big transition from studying in-house as such with my father, who knew me well. And honestly, had him wrapped around my little pinky too, to a certain degree. So I got away with stuff. Another bit of it was, you don't always get along with every single teacher. And the first private teacher I was with there, we weren't a good match. So after a couple of years, I managed to switch, which they didn't allow at the time. That was the problem, was it wasn't something you could do. But under certain circumstances, this transpired, and I was able to switch and start studying with Nina Mia Scott, who was a direct descendant of Galamian, the Galamian violin school, which is what my dad was too. He worked directly with Galamian. So it started to make more sense again, and I began to love it. And I began to really have my eye on the prize.
Right.
So that transition, so at the end of one of the school years, I was sort of someone who didn't practice a lot, and maybe everyone looked at sitting in the lounge going, oh, shit, what a shame. Made the transition, and over the summer came back and then won the concertmaster position in the Curtis Orchestra.
Girl.
So
it was like, what?
Yeah, a lot of people were that way, but I hope that I convinced them that it was the right choice.
That's awesome.
And then that year, I took a sub-audition for the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is entirely blind behind screens. And I just bombed terribly. I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even take care on the morning of to, get up and eat the right foods or anything. And I got there and I started playing, and I swear my knees were sounding like I was taking a percussion audition, clanking together. And it was such bad playing. And actually after that, my teacher Yumi was on the panel, and I remember calling her, and she said, "Kim, why didn't you play?" And I said, "I did. I was number 14 or whatever." And she looks at her notes. She goes, "Oh dear." So, but that I tell this story because that was actually probably the biggest thing that ever happened to me, because I decided at that point that I wasn't going to have that happen again. And I just changed everything about what I could change, which was, now I tell people, when you find out you have something coming up that you want to do well at, use nerves. Like, you're going to get nervous. It's going to happen. So try to get yourself nervous now. And that'll keep you from sitting down when you should go to the practice room. It'll keep you from watching TV or going on Facebook or any of the things that you do. Because that's what I do for myself. I'm like, okay, wait, in 3 weeks or whatever the timeline is, I'm going to be standing in front of an orchestra playing as a soloist. I'm not going to, so I can't enjoy the TV then anyways, right? So get up, get yourself nervous early on every day. Plug away at it and find one thing that you're less nervous about because you did the work, right? And the closer you get, the other thing that this does is it's training your system that you can be in charge of the nerves.
Yes.
It doesn't have to control you.
Yes.
Because you're saying, okay, now I choose to be nervous.
Right.
Right? So if you can say, now I choose to be nervous, you can also say, now I choose not to be nervous.
Yeah.
It just takes more practice.
Yeah.
But as you go forward with it and day by day, bite off a chunk of what that nervousness means, because you've done the work. And I always say to myself and to my students that if you've done everything you can do to be ready, then there's nothing else you can do, right? So that's as well as you're going to play today or tomorrow or whatever. And, so as long as you've done that, then you shouldn't be hard on yourself. Right. The only time to be hard on yourself, and
like, I didn't do it.
Yeah, if you didn't do what you should or you could have, and then you'll suffer the consequences.
Right.
But then the good thing about that, which is what happened to me in that sub audition, was that I learned from it, and I said, okay, that's what happens if I don't practice. And so I just changed it, and consequently, I'll just pat my back here. I won every consecutive 5 auditions with the Philadelphia Orchestra after that, getting in, moving over, moving up, and then finally the 5th one
zigzagging your way up.
The principal second chair, which is exactly where I'd like to be.
Exactly. And that's incredible. So that's a perfect segue to the audition prep. What was it like, and what are the differences between that first section audition versus the principal audition? Oh,
there were so many things, really. One being that for the first audition, I was still anonymous. So yes, we use screens, but at the end, the screen comes down.
Right.
And I think playing for your colleagues is much harder than playing for people that maybe know you peripherally, but not closely. So that was a big difficulty.
Right.
But, and also the other thing is through that, after getting in, I had a child afterwards. So then preparing the auditions, there was one of the auditions, I think it might have been for associate principal second. They sort of blend together, but my babysitter didn't show up. And so the call time was, however many minutes away while I'm still trying to figure it out. And we had just moved to the neighborhood, so I didn't know anyone.
Oh my goodness.
So I solved it. I don't know if I would get in trouble for this. I recognized a lady that had a child in the same preschool, and she was on the street, and I said, could you take my child? No, I didn't know her enough.
Awesome.
Yeah, but
That's
she was,
awesome.
and that was great. And the kids became fast friends.
But that's a great example of being very frazzled and then having to pull it together.
And I talk to people about that a lot.
Yeah.
And again, this comes back to preparation. Are you prepared for the worst thing to happen before you get there or while you're there?
Right.
I felt really bad one time. I was sitting on the committee for an audition, and I had a thermos with me, and somehow I knocked it over, and I was at the top of the section there, and it clanked its way all the way down to the bottom of the hall.
And you're like,
one step at a time. And this poor person is trying to, they were playing, I can't remember which excerpt, but something very soft. And, I felt like after, please everyone vote for this person.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
Yes,
just push them through.
Please. So, that type, anything can happen like this,
Yeah.
So preparation wise, so some of the things that have changed now, of course, when I first auditioned for Philly Orchestra, and it was the same for all of the orchestras at the time, they would give you a list that had, Brahms 1, 3, and 4, Beethoven 1, 4, 6, whatever. I'm just making them up. 9, complete Firebird, complete Petrushka, and whole parts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wish we could still do that, but we've had to modify that because there's a notable difference between if we ask a lot of full pieces and the number of good applicants we get.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because people are like, it's too much stuff. I'm not doing it.
And when you think about it, who do we want? We want people that have jobs that are already successful. So it's really hard to fit that into the schedule. Yeah. So we monitor that. So nowadays it's, you see that people say first page of Don Juan, or they'll say, one movement or exposition, blah, blah, blah. And also I had to play, entire Tchaikovsky or Romantic Concerto and entire Mozart Concerto, plus some solo Bach. And now it's, the exposition of the Romantic. It's much easier, but I have, by the same token, it's not easy to get a job. We listen with such,
intense ears.
Intense, that's a perfect word for it. Yeah, and critical ears. And I think when if you're, people who are looking to take auditions, also I recommend that they look at, when you see a list of excerpts, try to logically look, why do they have this excerpt here? Because we're covering everything. The Mendelssohn Scherzo is there to see if you can play a light spiccato. Yeah, how are your crescendos? Obviously rhythm for everything. Don Juan, can the person play with a lot of flair? And will they have, big dynamic sweeps? Brahms is the tone lush, So really finding those specific targets that we're going for. You have to play everything well, obviously.
Right.
But if you're also thinking about what did the committee come up with, I think that's really an important part of it.
Right, and looking for the kind of person that would fit in well with the section with this variety of choices.
And that's the other thing, too, is just to recognize that sometimes we'll hear people that are fantastic players, but they wind up not being our top choice because the style is different. Mm-hmm. They'd be better off in a different style. Mm-hmm. Does that mean, I'm often asked, should I change my style? No, I don't think you should. Mm-hmm. I think you should play who you are.
And you'll find a place that's for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a perfect segue to, was your time at Curtis helpful for you understanding the Philadelphia sound for the string section? Mm-hmm. Are those teachers part of what built that sound?
That's a famous question. And I think for a long time it was the case. While at Curtis, we were influenced by the concertmaster of the orchestra there, who was Norman Carroll at the time, who did string sectional with us. And I was influenced by my teacher, Yumi, because she was in the orchestra. I know that the viola section was, and so on. Well, I'm not sure about now because they don't actually have any orchestra members on their staff, on the faculty. So I don't know if they're, but you look back at Curtis at that time, and if you look at, let's just say Philadelphia Orchestra. So I graduated in '91, and the orchestra has this overwhelming number of graduates right around that time, between 87, let's say, and 94. Mm-hmm. So this 7-year time
Huge
period,
density,
and it's so many of us won jobs there. At that time, there was a lot higher sort of content that was orchestra based at that time. So, I think if maybe their goal is just to make soloists, but I don't think that's necessarily the smartest goal, but whatever, it's not my call. So.
Do you think now, I mean, of course the sound has changed over the years and it's different now. It's not, Chicago for brass. It's not, singular like maybe it was 50 years ago.
I think what I hear from visiting conductors, and that's pretty much the only way I can gauge, is that the sound still is very distinct for Philly.
That's fun.
And the reason I think that happens is the audition process. Like I said, because we're listening and like I said, we'll hire the person that sounds most like us or the most that will help our sound the most. So, and if it's a small sound, they're probably not going to get it. That's just the way it is. And sometimes we'll have the conversation, was it the instrument? But you got to be a big player for Philly strings,
right?
And that's our priority. And although I have to say that it's never sounded better as far as just the technique and the ensemble as well. So I'm very proud of my orchestra right now.
It's so exciting, and with Yannick there,
oh my goodness,
I feel like he's just exploded the energy and the passion.
I can't say enough good about Yannick Nézet-Séguin. So, yeah, it's one thing to have an amazing conductor, which he's an amazing conductor, amazing musician, but also, like, he's great at, like, he feels like a friend to you. But he's your boss. You do know. You can't take it too far. And then he knows how to speak to board members. He knows how to speak to volunteers. He knows how to talk to the audience. I've never met someone as just well-rounded as he is. I feel like I'm living in the presence of the new Bernstein.
Right.
He doesn't compose, but other than that, so I think the Mad and Philly Orchestra is enough. He doesn't have to compose.
Exactly. And all the guest appearances.
Yeah, he's absolutely unbelievable. And everyone who works with him loves him. Where does that ever happen?
Exactly. And I feel like I have never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I can feel the energy through people talking about him, and that's incredible.
Right.
And anything that's going to inspire people at that caliber to go to their maximum is so incredibly unique.
In some ways, the job has become much more tiring because we're always up there and we're giving everything we have, but then he's asking for more, and you can't say no to the guy. It's like, okay, I'll do it.
I got more. And that as an audience member is almost too much to bear. Like, it's just so incredible and so inspiring.
Yeah. A lot of the ends of our concerts sound like rock shows.
Yeah. People are freaking out.
It's
Which,
really
how cool to know that you've done that and that you've portrayed your message.
Yeah, exactly.
And they got it loud and clear.
And, a number of years ago, the Philadelphia Orchestra had the financial troubles that went around. Everyone was shocked in this bankruptcy and so on. We were the only of the major symphonies to do this and so on. Well, we don't need to get into the details of that. But one of the biggest fears we had was that then if we're taking a pay cut or this is happening, something like that, or the word is out that it's not secure or whatever, that if that was going on, that would people leave? Would our best musicians leave? Because we can. We're still the people that could go and take an audition or get hired somewhere else in a great... And that we've had lots of people have offers. I had an offer to go elsewhere. I stayed. Our associate principal bass, Joe Conyers, had an offer to leave. He stayed.
Yeah.
Nitzan Haroz, one of our principal trombonists, went to L.A. He came back. And I have to say, it's just there's a real commitment to musicianship in this group, and we all sort of back each other on it. And I think that is very unique to Yannick. Unique Yannick.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's just Yannick in that case because he was relatively new when that happened, and new to us, I should say. And but there's some other spirit in here that's just and that's why it sounds so good, and that's why it's so rewarding to be a part of. Like our recordings, we're doing all the Rachmaninoff for Deutsche Grammophon, and it's just with Daniel Trifonov, his piano for the concertos, and I can't stand it. It's so good.
Yeah,
I'm just like, wow, that's amazing.
And it's just so inspiring for me to hear that from somebody who's doing it, because you sometimes hear about people who are retired or this or that, but right now it's magic right there, and your family is so strong and everybody's so into it that I can't wait to hear them.
It feels like a much younger orchestra.
Yeah.
And I don't mean by age, but I mean so when I got into the orchestra, I did feel this sense of this arrival. It's an orchestra that's been doing like a big Cadillac, and it's been going for a long time. And
smooth ride.
Everyone's like churning away. And you had some of the people that had been there doing, they had their arms crossed a little bit, with their feet stuck in the ground. it sounded amazing. It was an amazing orchestra then. But I missed some of the, for instance, for a year I was in the Victoria Symphony before I went to Curtis, and there was this life to it that was like so exciting, and every concert people were, jumping out of their seat, if they just played that concert, and that, it's true. We play so many concerts that, I kind of laugh when someone says, good luck. And I'm like, thanks.
Okay.
That's nothing to do with it. But thank you for thinking that way. But that has changed. And it's just this energy that's so vibrant and exciting.
I love it. My last quick question for you is, if you had a piece of advice for kids, there's so many incredible students coming out, jobs are hard to get. What is something they should really keep their eye on when they're kind of going out there and starting the audition process?
Yeah, well, this is the same advice I've given my son since he was a child, because I think it's just sound advice. And that is, be the one that does extra. Be the one that if you have a chance to talk to your prof, you go talk to them. You don't leave the room if they're standing there and you have that moment. If you have a chance to, someone comes to town and you could play for them, play for them. That type of thing. If you get a chance to, sit and it's just do whatever you can. Make sure you know what you're doing. Become an expert at your field. There's so much to learn. So, I didn't learn a lot from my music history classes at Curtis. It just ended too early for me, and I wanted to learn more. So now I read, constantly read books about the great composers, and their stories are fascinating, and they help me play better, and they help me teach better, and my students hopefully listen more because of it, and so on. So just always be that one, because there's always someone who doesn't do the most, someone who does the least, right?
Right.
And I guarantee you they're not the ones that are really getting the opportunities in front of them. And if you go after everything, and don't be afraid to be like the kiss up, that type of thing. I had a little attitude about that when I was younger, and I now totally disagree with that attitude. I think if there's a chance for you to learn more, get more,
take it.
It's not kissing up. It's making sure that you're getting the most out of the experience. This is your life. It's your chance to do something great. Don't let it slip. Just go after it with both feet fully in.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Be sure to check the Inside the Notes Facebook page for details on our next guest.